Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to take a look at complex fractions. A complex fraction is basically a fraction that has a fraction in either the numerator or the denominator, or both. And we're going to start looking at numerical complex fractions, and then I want to extend it to algebraic complex fractions because they can look pretty intimidating, and I just want to show you the process or the technique for simplifying them. So when you see something like this, or some of the examples I'm going to show you, the goal is to simplify. So when we have a fraction over a fraction, so we have a fraction in the numerator, a fraction in the denominator, understand that this means division. So this means 4 divided by 5, and that whole thing is divided by 3/2, which is 3 divided by 2. So we could take it out of complex form by writing it as 4/5 divided by 3/2. And then we can follow our rules of dividing fractions, which says that's equal to 4/5 times the reciprocal of 3/2, so times 2/3. We look to see if there's any, because we're multiplying, we look to see if we have any common factors to cancel, and we don't. So we're just going to simply multiply our numerators, 8, times our denominator, 5 times 3, 15. So this mess simplifies to this. Now sometimes you're going to get more complex than that. Again, I want to start off with an example where we're working with numbers and before we get into letters. So in this example, we have 1/2 plus 1/3 divided by 1/4 plus 2/3. And I could go through, follow the rules of adding fractions to get one fraction in my numerator. I could follow the rules of adding these two fractions to get one fraction in my denominator, and then do what I did in the past example. However, I'm going to show you a bit of a shortcut. When you're working with complex fractions, find the lowest common denominator of all of the fractions. So we have a factor of 2. 4 is like 2 times 2, so we have a factor there of 2, another factor of 2 there, a factor of 3, and that covers that 3. So our lowest common denominator in this example of all of those fractions is 12. And my shortcut or technique that will save us quite a bit of time and steps is to simply multiply the numerator and the denominator by our lowest common denominator of 12. So in other words, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 12, and I'm going to multiply the denominator by 12. Now notice I'm multiplying basically by 12 over 12, so I'm not changing the value. And when I multiply by 12, I'm going to multiply each term by 12 in the numerator and in the denominator. So I'm going to do it longhand, and you don't need to write it out this way, but I'm basically taking 1/2 times 12 plus 1/3 times 12 over 1/4 times 12 plus 2/3 times 12. So it makes it look worse, and you might think, Laurel, that doesn't look like you're taking a shortcut, but I probably wouldn't write it like this. I would just do the multiplication. So then I've got 1/2 times 12 is 6, plus 1/3 times 12 is 4, 1/4 times 12 is 3, and 2/3 times 12 is 8. Just following my rules of multiplication, that's like 12 over 1, so 12 over 2 reduces to a 6. Then I simplify by adding my numbers. So that whole mess there simplifies to this. We have the same idea with this example, except now we're working with algebraic fractions instead of numerical fractions. We could combine these two terms by getting a common denominator and adding those. I could do the same thing here by getting a common denominator and subtracting, and then go through that process of the top fraction divided by the bottom fraction. But I find it a lot simpler to do the shortcut that I mentioned in the last example, which is multiplying numerator and denominator by your lowest common denominator. So we're going to find our lowest common denominator by looking at all of our denominators. If they're not factored, you will need to factor them. We just have all factors here. So we have a factor of A, a factor of B. This is like a factor of 1. A factor of A, I've got it. A factor of B, I have it. So my lowest common denominator for all of these fractions will be AB. So if I multiply the numerator by AB and the denominator by AB, I'm not changing the value, but it will allow me to get rid of all the individual fractions in the numerator and all the individual fractions in the denominator. So when I multiply my first term, 1 over A times AB, you don't have to write this step. I'm just showing what I'm doing. And then your next term, because you have to distribute that to each term. In the denominator, we have 2 times AB plus 1 over AB times AB. And then I'm multiplying. So that's like 1 over A times AB over 1. The A's will cancel, and I'm left with simply B. My second term, again, that's like AB over 1. So the B's will cancel, and I'll be left with A over 1. In the denominator, I'll have 2AB plus 1 over AB times AB over 1. The AB's will cancel, and that's equal to a 1. So it's going to be a lot simpler to use that shortcut than to go through and simplify it the way I've seen other textbooks show it. This method works. It's correct because you're not changing the value of it. It just is going to save you some steps. So let's try one more example to illustrate this, and hopefully you'll be able to do some of these questions on your own. I know you're probably looking at this example and you're probably ready to throw in the towel. It does look intimidating, but what we're going to do is just factor anything that can be factored in terms of our denominators. Look what our lowest common denominator is, and then multiply numerator and denominator by that, and then it cleans up really nice, and it will be much easier to simplify once we get to that point. So we look at all of our denominators. That's factored, that's factored. The denominator here is like a 1. The only one that we have to factor is this denominator. So I'm going to do that. I can factor out an x, and I'm left with y minus x. Now I look for my lowest common denominator. So I have a factor of x. That covers that factor and that factor. I have a factor of y minus x. Covers that, and then a factor of 1. So this is my lowest common denominator. So what I want to do is multiply the numerator by that, x times y minus x, and the denominator by that. Now, if you can multiply this to each of those terms and just cancel in your head, that's great. That's excellent. But if you can't do that, or you're worried about making a mistake, then do what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to move up here. But I'm just going to show it each term multiplied to this, and I'm going to write this as a fraction over 1 minus this fraction multiplied by this, but I'll write it as a fraction, which means I write it over 1. In the denominator, I have 1 over y minus x times y minus x over 1 plus 4 over 1 times x times y minus x over 1. So I know that it now looks worse than it did. However, by doing this, we're going to get rid of all of those denominators in our numerator and in our denominator, because what will happen is all of those denominators will cancel. So x cancels there. So I'm left with 2 times y minus x. minus 3 times the x cancels, the y minus x cancels, so it's just a 3. In the denominator, I have a factor of y minus x canceling with that, and I'll have 1 times x over 1, which is just x, plus here nothing cancels, so I'm going to have 4x times y minus x. So that looks way better than this, certainly, and even than this. Now it's just a matter of doing our algebraic simplification by doing our multiplication here, getting rid of our grouping symbols. So we have 2y minus 2x minus 3 over x plus 4xy minus 4x squared. And I want to take it this one further step. I don't like it partially factored like that because students are often tempted to cancel when it's not allowed. So that shows you the technique for simplifying complex fractions. Don't be intimidated. I know it doesn't look nice, but factor any denominator that you have, find your lowest common denominator, multiply the numerator and the denominator, which means multiply every term in your numerator and every term in your denominator by that lowest common denominator, and you'll get rid of all of these denominators by doing that, and then it's just a matter of simplifying what you're left with. So hopefully that makes sense. Try some of these. Don't let them intimidate you. Just practice, these examples, try them on your own, and then look at examples that you have in your textbook or your homework. Take care, and we'll see you on the next video.